I see no reason why Schmeling think that he should regain his title. I will take care of him on night June the 22nd.
Joe Louis was more than a heavyweight champion. He carried boxing on his shoulders and became far more than a fighter beyond the ring. Fans remember his knockouts, his calm focus, and his dominance over an era. But when asked about his toughest fight, Louis gave an answer that surprised many. It wasn't the fight most expected, and it revealed a truth only he could share: the champion and the symbol. Joe Louis was born on May 13, 1914, in Lafayette, Alabama, as the seventh of 8 children. His parents worked as farmers on a rented piece of land that didn't belong to them, so his family toiled and worked tirelessly to provide for him and his siblings. In 1926, his family moved to Detroit in search of a better life. While in Detroit, he made new friends, and one friend in particular convinced him to join a local gym where he got better at boxing. It was there, in a makeshift ring, that he discovered his true calling, and then his love for boxing came to be. It's interesting to know that Joe initially wasn't ever a lover of the sport. In fact, his mother wanted him to be a violinist, but his skills and boxing talent shone through. He was truly in his element. His amateur career was full of victories, even winning the National Amateur Athletic Union Championship in 1934 before turning professional later that same year. He quickly became an unstoppable force. He moved through the professional ranks, knocking out opponent after opponent with brute force and a devastating efficiency. From 1934 to 1936, he amassed an incredible record of 24 straight wins with 20 knockouts. He was different from the over-the-top and boastful boxers of the era. Joe Louis was calm and focused, and showed off with his fists when he needed to. The press quickly nicknamed him the Brown Bomber, and the name went on to be his moniker for years to come. The strength he possessed was something to behold, and the media just couldn't get enough of his knockout streak. He was winning fights and obliterating his competition, often in the early rounds. Joe Louis was more than just a boxer. He was a hero in a time when things were really tough in America. The country was in the Great Depression, and black people were treated unfairly socially and systematically. But when Joe Louis stepped into the boxing ring, he gave millions of people a reason to feel proud. His success felt like a win for his entire community. It was like he wasn't just fighting for himself, but for a whole nation. Every one of his victories was celebrated, bringing a rare moment of joy and unity to a country that was deeply divided. He was always on the news and radio, making him a famous star which put him under the spotlight constantly. He became a sensation, and the public adored his strength and skill. The whole country was watching him, and the press talked about him like he was an unstoppable force, and a reputation like that was bound to be tested. From living the farm life in Alabama to covering the newspapers in New York, Joe Louis had made it to the top of the boxing world, but he still had a long way to go before he could call himself the best in the world. He had to face an opponent who was much more than a fighter. His next match was about to bring the world's problems right into the ring with him. As Joe Louis was fighting his way up, a different kind of story was unfolding across the ocean. Before Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, Max Schmeling was a celebrated German hero and a former heavyweight champion. He was well known for his clean fighting style and sportsmanship, even in America, after winning the heavyweight title by defeating Jack Sharkey in 1930. But as the world changed, Schmeling's fame would soon be used for a much darker purpose by the Nazi regime. Once Hitler's Nazi regime took over Germany, they used everything they could to push propaganda. They saw Schmeling not just as a boxer, but as the perfect example of their master race. Strong and disciplined, Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, put immense pressure on Schmeling to win for the glory of the Third Reich. Every one of his punches was now expected to carry a hateful political message. But Max Schmeling was not the Nazi the regime made him out to be. He was a man caught in an impossible situation. He refused to join the Nazi Party, a decision that put him at great risk. Even more, he kept his Jewish manager, Joe Jacobs, who had been with him since 1928. This act of loyalty was a big risk, and a clear stand against the very people who were trying to control him. This showed that he was more than just a pawn, but a man who held on to his principles in a difficult time. The fight set to be held between Louis and Schelming was more than just a fight between the boxers. In one corner stood Joe Louis, representing American democracy and the hope of racial equality. In the other was Max Schmeling, who had become the face of Nazism and its false promise of racial superiority. The stakes were greater than ever, far beyond a championship title. The whole world watched with interest, knowing this was a fight about much more than who had the better right hook. In a world on the brink of war, this boxing match became a symbol of the conflict between freedom and oppression. On June 19, 1936, the first fight between Louis and Schmeling was a contest with great stakes. It was a battle of American ideals against a dangerous new political force. The air in Yankee Stadium was electric. It was the moment of truth. Everyone knew what was going to happen, or so they thought. The crowd of over 42,000 people had come to see Joe Louis continue his unstoppable march to the heavyweight title. They saw Schmeling as nothing more than a stepping stone, a soon-to-be-forgotten champion from another time. But Schmeling and his manager, Joe Jacobs, had a secret weapon. They had spent weeks in a quiet training camp, watching films of every one of Louis's fights, monitoring his movements and fighting style, and they had discovered a subtle but crucial flaw. When the bell rang for the first round, Louis started with his usual confidence. He was sharp, throwing quick jabs and powerful combinations, but something was wrong. Schmeling wasn't retreating. Instead, he was absorbing the blows, and every time Louis dropped his hand, Schmeling fired back with a clean, crisp right hand. As mentioned, Louis had one Achilles heel, his tendency to drop his left hand after throwing a jab. Schmeling's plan was simple and risky. Wait for the jab, and then land a hard right hand of his own. It wasn't just a lucky punch, it was a carefully coordinated attack. In the early rounds, the shots were surprising, but as the fight wore on, they became more and more punishing. The crowd went quiet, and Louis' team grew anxious. Their fighter, who had a streak of wins and was supposed to be unbeatable, now looked dazed and tired. The tension built with every round, and by the 12th round, Louis was tired. He had taken too many hard shots to the head, and his legs were wobbly. The crowd was on its feet, now in a stunned silence. They watched as Louis threw a desperate combination, and just as he dropped his left hand, Schmeling saw his chance. He threw a final thunderous right hand that landed with a sickening thud, causing Louis to crumble to the canvas. His body went limp. The referee counted him out as the crowd watched in disbelief. The stadium was silent except for the cheers of the German press and a handful of Schmeling's supporters. The defeat was more than a loss. It was a public humiliation. Louis was devastated. For Louis and the millions of people who supported him, the defeat was a shock. The Nazi regime took advantage of his loss and immediately used the victory as propaganda, declaring it proof of their hostile racial theories. The loss was a deep blow to Louis and to a nation looking for a reason to hope for a better future. But the defeat didn't break him. Instead, it lit a fire in him. He wanted to improve and be better, to fight for the people who looked up to him and adored him, and to prove he was the best. He would get his chance 2 years later in what would become the most important fight of his life, the weight of a nation and the punch heard around the world. The knockout loss to Max Schmeling was a big humiliation Joe Louis would never forget. It was more than a defeat, but a gut punch that shook his entire boxing world. For him, the rematch was no longer just another fight. It was his chance to take back everything he lost. He felt the weight of it every day, and he knew that the fight meant more than a title. It was a national setback, and it had a profound impact on the American public. President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself recognized the symbolic importance. He called Louis to the White House and famously told him, "Joe, we need muscles like yours to beat Germany." This wasn't just a friendly chat. It was a direct call to duty, turning a boxing match into a mission for the entire country. Louis' training for the rematch was on another level entirely. He had always been a dedicated fighter, but this time He was driven by something deeper than money or fame. He wasn't the same fighter. His loss to Schmeling had driven him to train harder than ever. He ran for miles, hammered the heavy bag, and spent hours in the ring, focused on fixing every mistake he had made. He had to be ready. He knew that the world was watching. Not just boxing fans, but people from every corner of the globe. The political stakes were now front and center, with both sides using the fight to push their own agenda. The media played a huge role in this. Nazi Germany continued to parade Schmeling around as their Aryan hero, a symbol of their racial superiority. Their propaganda machine worked overtime, making sure everyone knew that a victory for Schmeling was a victory for their ideology. But the American media fought back just as hard. They cast Louis as the champion of freedom and democracy, and their headlines screamed about the need to defeat the Nazi pawn. The narrative grew bigger and bigger, turning the two boxers into symbols of good versus evil. Newspapers across the country featured front-page stories on the upcoming bout. For a moment, in the lead-up to the fight, the racial divisions that had always plagued America seemed to fade away. Louis's cause became a point of unity, drawing together people who were once divided. The fight transcended race, making him a symbol of American defiance against an oppressive and hateful ideology. The entire country, black and white, united behind him, seeing his fight as their own. It was a moment of national solidarity, a rare thing in those difficult times. The stage was set for the most important fight of his life, a fight where the fate of a nation and a piece of the world felt like it was riding on every punch. On the evening of June 22, 1938, Yankee Stadium wasn't a baseball park. It was the center of the universe. The stage was set. The world held its breath. This was more than a fight. It was a moment of truth. Over 70,000 people packed into the stands, and millions more huddled around their radios in their homes, listening to the static-filled broadcast. The air was thick with tension, many feeling as if they were watching the future of the world unfold in real time. When Joe Louis and Max Schmeling walked to the ring, the contrast was impossible to ignore. Schmeling, calm and composed, carried the weight of a powerful and hateful regime on his shoulders. Louis, on the other hand, walked with a focused and fierce determination. Unlike the usual confidence, he moved with the hope of a nation riding on him. This wasn't just a sports rivalry anymore. It was a battle of ideals playing out on a 20-foot square canvas. The bell for the first round rang, and there was no feeling out process. The Joe Louis who stepped out was a force of nature. He moved on Schmeling immediately, with a look of grim determination on his face. Louis ignored his trainer's pleas for caution, unleashing a furious, relentless assault of punches. Schmeling, who had planned to counter Louis's jab, was overwhelmed. He couldn't get a punch off as Louis hammered him with a brutal combination that sent him to the canvas. As soon as Schmeling got up, Louis was on him again with a whirlwind of fists and fury. Soon after, another knockdown. The end came just 2 minutes and 4 seconds into the round. Louis trapped Schmeling on the ropes and unleashed a final brutal barrage of blows. Schmeling's corner threw in the towel, but it was too late. He crumbled to the ground in a heap, his body yielding. The referee stopped the fight, and an explosive roar erupted from the crowd, a sound of relief and joy that echoed across the country. People poured into the streets, celebrating as if the war had already been won. The victory was more than a championship. It was a moral triumph. It was a sign that in a world hanging on the edge of darkness, decency and democracy could still win. Joe Louis didn't just win a fight that night. He gave a struggling nation a reason to believe in itself again, a legacy beyond the ring. The fight was over, but the legend was just beginning. Joe Louis's hardest battle wasn't fought for a title, but for something far greater. That first-round knockout of Max Schmeling cemented his place in history, not just as a great boxer, but as a cultural icon and a national hero. His victory was a powerful blow to the Nazi propaganda machine. It was a clear, undeniable sign that their ideas of Aryan supremacy were nonsense. For America, It was a huge step forward in the struggle for racial equality. Lewis's win proved that a black man could stand on the biggest stage and be a champion for all Americans. The African Americans saw him as a heroic symbol of racial uplift and pride. His victory wasn't just a moment of celebration, but a symbol of what was possible, a promise that a more just society could one day be a reality. He became a beacon of hope for people worldwide who were fighting against oppression. After the war, the world learned the truth. Lewis had one Achilles heel: his tendency to drop his left hand after throwing a jab. Schmeling's plan was simple and risky: wait for the jab, and then land a hard right hand of his own. About Max Schmeling's complicated role: he was not a true believer. Max Schmeling was not the Nazi the regime made him out to be. He was a man caught in an impossible situation. He refused to join the Nazi Party, a decision that put him at great risk. Even more, he kept his Jewish manager, Joe Jacobs, who had been with him since 1928. This act of loyalty was a big risk and a clear stand against the very people who were trying to control him. This showed that he was more than just a pawn, but a man who held on to his principles in a difficult time. Because of his defiance, he was largely ostracized in post-war Germany. He lost everything and was struggling financially. Joe Louis, hearing of his rival's troubles, stepped in. He sent money and even helped Schmeling get work in America, an incredible act of friendship that transcended their rivalry and the politics that had forced them to be enemies. It showed that both men in their own way had fought for something right. Even when the world tried to turn them against each other, they became lifelong friends, their bond a testament to the power of forgiveness and mutual respect. After Joe Louis' incredible knockout of Max Schmeling on June 22, 1938, his life was never the same. He was a national hero, celebrated like a king. He continued to dominate the boxing world, holding on to his heavyweight title for a record-breaking 140 months. When America entered World War II, Louis didn't hesitate. He joined the army in 1942, famously saying, "We're on God's side." Instead of fighting overseas, he used his fame to boost morale, traveling over 35,000 miles to put on boxing exhibitions for more than 2 million troops. His presence was a symbol of hope and a reminder of what they were fighting for. He became a sergeant and earned the Legion of Merit Medal. He was a hero in the ring and a hero for his country. But when the war ended, his life began to change. The man who had once been invincible in the ring started to face his own battles. After retiring from boxing in 1949, he discovered he was in deep financial trouble. Despite earning millions, he had spent his earnings lavishly and had very poor management, which left him with a massive debt to Uncle Sam. He was forced to come out of retirement, fighting with only a fraction of his old power. He was even knocked out by Rocky Marciano in 1951, a sad end to a legendary career. He eventually declared bankruptcy in 1956. The fame that had brought him so much admiration and praise was also a burden. He struggled with health issues, especially heart problems, and eventually required a wheelchair to move around. The calmness and dignity he had shown throughout his career was tested by his later struggles in life. He ended up working in Las Vegas as a greeter at Caesar's Palace to pay off his debts. It was during this time that a surprising friendship blossomed. His old rival, Max Schmeling, came to his aid, showing the same kindness Louis had shown him during his own struggles and helped him financially, remaining a close friend for the rest of his life. On April 12, 1981, Joe Louis died of cardiac arrest in Desert Spring Hospital near Las Vegas. His career proved that sports could be more than just a game, but a platform for social change. He was a champion, not just of boxing. He was a man who lived a life fighting not just for himself, but for his people. He carried the world on his shoulders and proved that a man could overcome any obstacle, inside or outside the ring. His legacy will live on for years to come, as many will forever remember the Brown Bomber. His defeat and incredible comeback victory against Max Schmeling remains a powerful and inspiring story. What part of Joe Louis's life story do you find the most amazing? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next video.